Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Daily Fulham podcast, brought to you by the Global Sports Podcast Network, the only place to give you daily coverage on all 20 Premier League teams, as well as a dedicated podcast for women's football. My name is Gavin Ruffle, and it's that time of the week where we start to look forward. We look ahead to the weekend's game, and we do that by inviting a guest on from one of the other podcasts. And this week, that guest is from the Daily Palace team. We have Dan. How are you doing today, Dan?
I'm doing all right so far. It's been a good week so far. Not well, ignoring the weekend fixture, which I really don't want to go too far into because it was a bit of an embarrassment. But we'll look forward to the Fulham game.
You did bring up the weekend's game, so let's make a start on that. I mean, Crystal Palace's form has been a bit up and down recently, hasn't it? And playing Everton on the weekend, I quietly fancy them to win that game, just given the euphoria Everton experienced after the Merseyside derby, scoring that last-minute goal. I thought it might be a good opportunity. They might have maybe slightly overlooked this game, put all their energy into that Merseyside derby, but succumbed to another home defeat. What went wrong in that game, do you feel?
Oh, pretty much everything went wrong. One of the goals, we quite literally threw the ball to them. Just absolute embarrassment. And I think one of the second goal, we just kind of got caught flat-footed. There was kind of slight calls for handball, and there were sort of a few Palace players that were kind of waiting for the referee to blow the whistle if anything was going to happen. There was also, I think, that there was an indecisive VAR decision. A corner went out of play, but between the 2 or 3 camera angles they had, they couldn't actually determine if it went out of play or not. So they just ruled it as a disallowed goal. So basically, there's just an absolute comedy of errors across the pitch. It wasn't fun to watch, and then having to talk about it on Monday morning either. That was rough. Because we very much thought that kind of play had stopped from Palace because we've been doing really well since like the end of November. And then it just come back with all of these silly little mistakes again.
But I guess if we look ahead to the weekend's game now, there's probably a bit more optimism going into it, knowing that you're playing away from home.
Oh, definitely. We got a really, really good away form. I think it's 7 or 8. I think we are undefeated away from home. So, I'm definitely looking forward to this. I don't know why we can't win at Selhurst Park, or at least make it life difficult for ourselves anyway. It's the home and away form is definitely like chalk and cheese, and I don't know why. It really is very weird.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing my research before this episode, and I was having a look, and I seen that you haven't lost away from home since October, and haven't even conceded a goal in the last 4. Whereas since the end of October, you've only won once at Selhurst, and that was against the bottom club Southampton. So I know you said you can't put your finger on it, but if you had to, why such the stark difference?
I have absolutely no idea. I don't, because there seems to be this idea that Selhurst Park is some kind of like really difficult place to come play against. I was talking about, I think this with the Arsenal guys a couple of months ago, and I think that's a complete and utter fallacy. It's a myth. I don't know why. It's just sort of, as soon as we come to Selhurst Park, it's almost like it's either comforts or something like that just doesn't click. And I can't put my finger on it because we don't play any differently. We play the same tactics and largely the same team over and over and over again, as many times as depending on injuries, etc. But for some reason, just at Selhurst Park, we just don't play very well. We make life difficult for ourselves, and I don't know why.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, actually, because I always hear it. I always pundits say, Selhurst Park's a tough place to go. And when I've looked at Crystal Palace, their kind of heydays in the Premier League, it's been made out of their form away from home, going back to the days when Wilfried Zaha was there. We were a really good counter-attacking team, and they seem to collect a lot of points on the road. And I mean, we've already dwelt on the Everton defeat there at home, and if we go back to October, they lost the corresponding fixture 2-0 at home to Fulham. What do you sort of remember from that game that might have an effect, an impact maybe on the game on the weekend?
Well, I seem to remember there were two goals that were chalked off by Fulham for being offside. I think it was very sort of minor things like that. And so you probably could have won 4-0 quite handsomely on that game. It's just, that was part of the time of the year where we were just awful. We could have very easily lost a load of games 4 or 5-0 before half time. And Fulham one was not too dissimilar to that. Smith Rowe kind of tearing us apart, which doesn't help being the Croydon boy.
Yeah.
And then you got and then you had the ex of Anderson clearing off the line and things like that, and it's just like, oh come on, just yet another game where we were just so bad and nothing really clicked. Yeah, so it's just one of those. Well, it's that time of the year where we were just bad. Just sucked.
Yeah, it was certainly a very slow start to the season, wasn't it? And I think expectations were raised maybe to maybe a higher level than they possibly should have been, given the form, the way you ended the season. Everyone was playing to their maximum ability, and there was a lot of talk about Europe possibly being challenges for Europe this season. And they are where they usually are in the table, aren't they, this time of the year, which is 13th. They're kind of in no man's land. They're not going to get relegated, but they're too far adrift of the teams in front of them. The challenge for Europe. So how do you feel? How do you feel on a whole? Is good season, bad season, indifferent?
So far, well, the last couple of months has been a good season. It started off, as you said earlier, and I've said many times, absolutely woeful. But not unsurprising. We are a slow starting team. We take our time to let everybody have a false sense of security. Then it becomes a full sense of security, and then we have to fight our way back up the league. So where we are now is kind of where I would expect us to be. I just would have preferred it to be a little bit more comfortable instead of sort of losing like 1-0s and 2-0s and things like that. But if we can push a little bit further and make it a little bit more secure, just because I know Palace and we can get very, very easily tumble into that bottom third of the league with only a couple of losses. Like Spurs and Newcastle and Man United are perfect examples of, if you lose a few games in the Prem, you can tumble down the league very quickly. So if we can kind of secure where we are, maybe get into the top 10. If we can get top 10, I'll be absolutely ecstatic. Would consider that a huge success. And also, as we're still in the FA Cup, if we can get on a good run of that, if we can get to a quarter-final or even a semi-final, a trip to Wembley, also another sort of huge success for the season.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to come on to the FA Cup, actually. I mean, you're still going well in that. Fulham are also involved in that competition. And it seems like there's an opportunity for a lot of teams sort of in that mid-table region, because there's a lot of the top teams have got knocked out, the likes of Liverpool and Arsenal, Spurs, if you want to call them top team, Chelsea. But you got a home tie, a local derby against Millwall. We kind of outsiders recognise the rivalry between Brighton and Crystal Palace, and maybe from a Millwall side of things, their rivalries with West Ham. Can you just elaborate maybe on what the rivalry is like between Millwall and Palace?
Well, the rivalry it doesn't come along very often because we haven't been in the same league for a while now, so it doesn't come up very often. But it's because it's one of the closer teams in London, because there are only so many in like South London, and I think the only one that's slightly closer to us is Charlton, which is probably considered slightly more of a rivalry game. It's more of a local rivalry than a sort of rivalry. What the Brighton one, which is a rivalry game, it's not strictly a derby. But the Millwall is probably closer to a local derby game more than anything else. And you know what Millwall fans are like, so they're to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are in the last 16 now, favourites for this tie, so just a couple of games away from Wembley. I think he fielded a strong side in the last round, didn't he, against Doncaster. Do you think it's full strength from now on in, as far as the FA Cup goes?
Glasner likes to play full strength regardless of the competition, so we did the same thing in the League Cup. Probably take a couple of people out if they were sort of nursing an injury here and there. But pretty much it's going to be full strength all the way through, as much as humanly possible, I think, because Glasner doesn't do it any other way. He wants to win every single game. And we also don't have the depth to really get away with rotating too much. And even if we do, the players are kind of like for like, so we're not going to change tactically that much. It's just whoever's in form is going to be sort of maybe stand out a little bit more.
Interesting. So we've spoken a little bit there about the season as a whole. In the next part, we're going to be focusing on one or two of the individual players and maybe what happened in the transfer window. But before we do that, let me draw your attention to our sponsors here at GSPN. Here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencaster came out the clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencaster. I'm going to start not by talking about a current Crystal Palace player. I'm going to talk about a former Palace player now at Fulham. He made that move, didn't he, in the summer? Joachim Andersen returning to Craven Cottage, where he got relegated with Fulham a few seasons back, but he was captain in that campaign. What was the Palace view on that move at the time? Because I know you see a lot of stuff on social media, and I think it's hard to get a real idea of the overall feeling, because there's a lot of guff that gets spread on social media, and there's a lot of, oh, well, he was never that good anyway. But what do you feel what the genuine feeling was amongst fans seeing him move to a club like Fulham, I guess, where a lot of people would have seen that maybe as a sideways move? He's not going to a club that's necessarily going to be competing to win trophies or to qualify for the Champions League.
Well, it was more shock than anything, because there was no rumours, no nothing. It just came out of nowhere. I think we were talking about it on the pod when it actually happened, and it's just like, because the entire transfer saga in the early part of the summer was Gahey going to Newcastle or Liverpool or whatever, and then suddenly in the middle of the night, something like that, oh yeah, Anderson's gone to Fulham. What? There was no rumours, no nothing. He was just gone, and it was like, oh, now we have to scramble to try and get a replacement centre-back in. So that's when we go and get Lacroix in from Wolfsburg, and we go and get Chalobah on loan from Chelsea until he recently left, got recalled. So that it was more just shock more than anything else. Just like, it was nothing there, and there was no animosity, no nothing. It was just, oh, he's gone. Why has he decided to go to Fulham? He was seemed to be perfectly happy at Palace. He had, I think, at least a couple more years left on his contract, so there was no beef there. He just left. So I probably just assumed that he preferred to play at Fulham than play at Palace, which, yeah, fine by me.
Yeah, I think there was talk, wasn't there? Maybe they didn't offer him the terms that he wanted, so then they were standing firm, weren't they, on the fact that they wanted to keep Gahey, and that bid from Newcastle kept getting bigger and bigger, but not to the amount that they wanted. So I always felt, because there was a little bit of speculation with Fulham over the summer, but as you said, it came out of the blue. It was only lasted for 3 or 4 days, and then he ended up making the move. So I thought, as long as they kept all the Gahey, that there was a possibility that Anderson would join Fulham. They replaced him with Lacroix. What would you say the similarities, the differences between those two are then?
I would say they're fairly sort of similar. They can both play these sort of long passes with fairly decent accuracy. I just think Lacroix gets the fans going a bit more than Anderson did. He's sort of, after the game, he's celebrating or consoling with the fans. He'll get them riled up and sort of to try and make some kind of noise and sort of encouragement from them. He started to get a little bit more into his stride, and his sort of partnership with Gahey and now Richards, they've started to form a quite sort of fairly solid defensive unit. They still will make mistakes here and there. They're only human. But yeah, I don't think there's much difference between them. So yeah, I don't think it's changed the squad all that much. So yeah, Anderson moving on, got us Lacroix, then yeah, fine by me.
And you talk about the defensive unit there. I mean, a lot of clubs in the transfer window, they weren't busy. Palace, they did make a couple of signings. One of those signings was Ben Chilwell at left back. I think he's a player that needed a move. He's clearly not in the plans of Enzo Maresca, but it seemed like a bit of a curious move on the surface. Maybe you can give a better explanation as to why the manager looked at Chilwell, because it seems like Tyreek Mitchell has cemented his place in the team. He's made that kind of a position his own, left back, left wing back. So why did they go for Ben Chilwell?
I think it'd mainly for depth, because we don't have a second left back. Our backup fullback is Joe Ward, so who's now currently out injured and has been for a while. So I think the main reason was to get somebody with experience, particularly Premiership experience, just to get in on loan as a kind of backup for Tyreek Mitchell so he can take a rest here and there, and probably on occasions maybe move Tyreek Mitchell into sort of a central central defensive defender kind of position, that wide centre-back role, and get Chilwell to be sort of a bit more of an attacking threat, because he does have a pretty nasty cross when he wants to, and I think he's a fairly decent set-piece taker as well. So those are probably the attributes they were looking for, because we are struggling with set-piece takers as well. So I think that was probably the main thinking process behind getting Chilwell in, just to sort of to cement the sort of the depth in the squad.
Do you think it was mainly for cover then? Because I feel that's an interesting. You kind of say that, because Ben Chilwell was a kind of guy that needs his career to get back on track, and it's not that long ago he was in the England setup and he was the first choice left back. So I would have thought if he was to get a move, then it would have been agreed upon, or he would have been given, the idea that he's going to be first choice. So you think he would have gone to Crystal Palace knowing that he's competing rather than that he is going to be the number one guy?
I think he's probably perfectly happy. I think he's more just to get him out of Chelsea. He wanted game time. He wasn't going to get played at Chelsea, and because of his wages, that probably not a lot of Premiership teams were willing to sort of fork out that kind of bit. So getting a loan move for 3 or 4 months, get him in the shop window, and hopefully he can either make the move permanent at Palace, or he can try and find somewhere else, just so he's actually out in the shop window a little bit more. So I think he's perfectly happy to actually just play as a sort of semi-rotation, because he's coming back from several kind of long-term injuries over the last couple of years. So just getting some first team football at a Premiership level is probably what he was after.
And the other player you did bring in was Esse from Millwall, and he scored on his debut within minutes, or within seconds, I think it was. Might have even been his first touch.
It was his first touch. He literally came on the pitch and his first touch.
Afterwards. Is he one for the future then, or is he one that's going to be pushing for a start in the coming months?
I think it's, at the moment, I think it's probably one for the future, because he's kind of in the same position as sort of Eze. So I think it's more there is a distinct possibility that Eze might not be here next season. So it's trying to mould him into the Eze kind of mould, or even a bit more of Elise, and try and get him into the squad in a kind of essentially a rotation situation. Come in on sort of a half-time, something like that, just to get him into the squad and get him a bit settled, because he is 19, so it's definitely going to be one for the future. And it's Palace going into the Championship to find sort of these gems, and we seem to be very, very good at finding these guys and then giving them the experience in the Premiership, like we've done with Wharton as well. So it's definitely one for the future. It's just going to be giving him the next few months to sort of get up to pace, get up to speed, and then I think next season you'll probably start seeing him starting a few more games, probably playing alongside Eze if he's still there, or whoever else we've brought in to try and sort of replace Eze.
And just the final one, as far as the transfer window is concerned, is there anyone that you missed out on, or is there an area in the squad that you felt needed fixing and needed identifying, but they weren't able to bring anyone in that particular position?
Well, because we were talking about this on our podcast for ages, that we needed a left back, and Chilwell fit the bill, and he'd been brought up, I think, in a couple of rumours before, but it was slightly infeasible because Chalobah was on loan, so we couldn't have two from the same club. So once that freed up, that made the Chilwell one possible. But in terms of positions that we needed, I'm always going to be looking for a kind of playmaking midfielder, as it's sort of a position that Palace desperately kind of needs. But now we've got Wharton's come back from fairly long-term injury and still sort of getting minutes under his belt. And in the Doncaster game, he showed what we were kind of missing. So I'm less sort of looking at that anymore, but it's still definitely on the radar as some kind of a player that Palace does need, one of these sort of almost midfield generals that a lot of clubs are always looking for. But in the case of actually players we didn't get, I don't think we didn't miss out on anybody because there wasn't a lot of rumours when it came to Palace. We kept everything very close to our chest until basically the last minute. So with the transfer window, I'm fairly happy with what we've got. And we'll just have to see what it's like in the summer.
Mm-hmm. And we can't not talk about Crystal Palace without mentioning the main man at the minute, which is Jean-Philippe Mateta, who's on absolute fame. He's found his goal-scoring form again. Interesting one, isn't it? Because he had a couple of years at Palace where he didn't really do much. He was kind of going through the motions. And then all of a sudden, towards the end of last season, new manager comes in and he's scoring everything. What do you think the big turnaround was for him?
I just think it was probably a bit of confidence because when Palace got him in, he was basically a third-string centre-forward. We had Edouard and Benteke ahead of him, as well as Ayew as well. So he's a third, fourth-string centre-forward. And I think when we signed him, he'd come off a year injury. I think he'd broken his leg or some sort of long-term injury. So I think it was just getting some confidence because Roy Hodgson obviously didn't sort of think much of him. So and Glasner comes in and seems to have this effect on players. He seems to have done it at Wolfsburg as well, and that he's just sort of invigorated players and given them some confidence to actually sort of get to their full potential. And Mateta is just, you watch him pre-game and after game, he is just full of confidence, full of beans. He is definitely trying to take the club and basically putting it on his back and drag them kicking and screaming.
And I know he had a slow start to the season, as did a lot of the Crystal Palace players, well, as did the club in general. Were you always confident that he would find his goal scoring form again then, like he did the end of last season? Or was there any concern, the element of you thinking maybe he's just hit a purple patch and we're not going to see that sort of form again?
There was definitely concern at the beginning of the season, but that was across the entire board. But when your main man centre forward isn't scoring, it's always a concern. But Palace have had that for years. We've had Benteke, we've had Edouard, we've had centre forwards that can't score for love nor money, and then they'll just suddenly get a couple and like, oh, brilliant! All right, let's go. But Mateta is sort of a very much a form player. So if he's on form, he's going to get the goals. If he's not, it's just going to be wandering around trying to sort of be a sort of pest in the box. Really, it's just my sort of real issue is the fact that we are becoming slightly reliant on him. We need some other people to actually start sort of putting in a few goals as well. Nketiah is definitely one that needs to start pulling his weight a bit, or he's going to probably be pushed further and further down the pecking order, or even try to get rid of him as well. So, yeah, I was always confident that Mateta was going to start doing it. It's just when he gets going is the problem. He needs to get one or two under his belt first, and then he'll start getting into positions. Also helps recently that Eze has now gotten into this sort of playmaking form, and they've kind of started to develop this really sort of deadly combination. I think it was sort of evident in the West Ham game where they were just they know where each other's going to be, and it's starting to sort of bear fruit and come to fruition now.
Interesting. And of course, Crystal Palace fans will be hopeful that Jean-Philippe Mateta, the goal scoring streak, can continue in this weekend's fixture, which we will look ahead to in a bit greater detail in just a moment. But before we do that, just got to draw everyone's notice that we do have brand new sponsors here at the Global Sports Podcast Network. So let's hear about them.
Your body is unique, and Global Sports Podcast Network has partnered with Bionique, the world's most personalised supplements. Bionique provide 100% tailor-made supplements designed to deliver precisely what your body needs at exactly the right levels to optimize your health. No guessing. So click the link in the show notes. Use the code GSPN2025 for 40% off your first month's subscription. Bionique. Don't settle for off-the-shelf solutions made for just anybody. Get what's right for you right now.
So Crystal Palace will be looking to right the wrongs of that defeat earlier in the season where Fulham won by 2-0. Is there anyone on the Fulham team, in the Fulham squad, that you're particularly wary about? You're thinking if they have a good day, we've got problems here?
Oh, I think I mentioned him earlier. Smith Rowe is definitely one that I'm always going to be paying attention to because he can be a real handful he was kind of wasted at Arsenal because as soon as Arteta came in, he had no idea what to use him as.
Were Palace in for him? Were Palace in for him at any stage in the summer?
They were, actually. He was on there was a few rumours going around because he wanted out of Arsenal. And it's like, Palace, he's a Croydon boy, come home, right, you'll be beloved. And yeah, he decided to go to Fulham instead. And we got Nketiah as a sort of consolation from Arsenal. But he's definitely a player I'm going to sort of be very wary of. He can be really, really tricky and really handful, especially in the last game where he scored. I think it was his first goal for Fulham. I'm not sure, but he got two. One of them got called offside. We just couldn't handle him. So he's definitely one that I'm going to be paying attention to. And also, you've got to keep an eye on the ex Anderson. Just as he's going to do something again. You just know it is. It's sort of when the ex-players come back, you know it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I think he had a really good game at Selhurst Park, and his form of late has just been a little bit indifferent. He had an injury, which he sustained at home to Wolves a few months back, and then once he came back from that injury, his form's kind of been a bit up and down, but he had a good game on the weekend, so hopefully that's a sign of things to come. He can have another strong game on the weekend, as did Smith Rowe. Smith Rowe's another one that Fulham fans have been a little bit critical of in recent times, but he seemed like, the spring in his step, and he was back to his best on the weekend. As far as the team, what are you looking at? Is it going to be similar to Everton, or is he likely to make changes?
I'm pretty sure it's going to be the strongest squad he can get away with. Besides from our 2 or 3 long-term injuries, I think as far as I know, everybody's clear. So it'll be the usual suspects when it comes to the lineup and probably the formation. Glasner really doesn't change all that much unless he has to. So I'm expecting sort of the likes of Mateta, Eze, Gahey are going to be on there. You're going to have Richards and Lacroix in the defence. Wharton might get a game. I think he's slowly coming back in, so he might get a start with Hughes as well. So, yeah, it's going to be probably the same 11 that has been put out for the last few games.
And you said it's hard to put your finger on why the home form and away form has been different, but I think obviously the glaring stat is that they've not conceded a goal in any of the last 4 games. So just maybe isolating each of those games, what have they done particularly well that has led to them coming away with all 3 points?
I'm not sure. Just sort of sometimes it is like the Man United game. The opponent didn't play particularly well, and they just couldn't. Either their formation or their setup didn't work. So against Man United, they decided, right, we're not going to have a centre forward. We're now going to put what essentially is a box-to-box midfielder as a solo attack. And it's like, oh, okay, we'll just play right through that, no problem. It's just sometimes I think Palace's setup slightly confuses people, but then there's other ways. Then at home, we just get torn apart. I don't know. It's very, very weird, and I don't know why.
So with that being said, what kind of game are you anticipating on the weekend? Do you see it being free-flowing, a lot of goals in it, or would you see it possibly being a cagey affair?
I expect it to be fairly free-flowing. Palace when it goes to defence, we can kind of we'll be somewhat solid. We'll try and play in front of us, but we can get kind of done with through balls and maybe sort of overloading the box and things like that at close range. But when we go forward, we are fairly effective on the counter attack, especially if you've got Eze, an open field, essentially isolated by himself. I think he can do quite a lot of damage given half a chance. So I'm expecting it to be somewhat free flowing. I wouldn't say high scoring, but I'm expecting goals in this.
Yeah. I know Fulham came up against a team on the weekend that played a back 5. I know Crystal Palace always played a back 5. He doesn't tend to tinker, does he? Does he sometimes change? Does he ever go to a back 4?
I don't. As far as I know, he's only played essentially 3 at the back and then 2 wing backs, and then kind of defensive sort of midfielders. So sort of compact. It's very much a counter-attack football. It's trying to keep the ball in front of us as much as possible, and then just sort of try and muscle our way to the ball and then get it down the pitch as quickly as possible.
Yeah, well, that's it. That's interesting because I guess they're almost set up in a similar way to Nottingham Forest, were Fulham's last opponents, where they got the five at the back, they got that big striker up front. Nottingham Forest, so Chris Wood, you guys, Mateta, and they got the pace as well, just like you guys have. So I wonder if Fulham, maybe given the result on the weekend, and to be fair, the 2-1 against Forest was flattering for Forest because their goalkeeper was by far and away their best player. I think Fulham had 24 shots on goal, and that could easily have been a 4 or 5-1 drubbing. The 2-1 doesn't tell the whole story. So I'm sure Fulham fans will be hoping for a similar performance and then just convert their chances when they get them, when they're on top in games, and be able to score their goals. So we can't end things without giving a score prediction then. So Dan, what are you saying for the weekend's game?
I have to go for a Palace win. I think it's going to be 2-1. I don't see us keeping a clean sheet. Not the game against Everton, still very much in our sort of memories. Sort of, it's going to be, that's definitely going to be there. That's going to be drummed into them. Like, you can't make mistakes like that. But like, Mateta is on form at the moment, so he's going to be up for it as well. And I think he's got like two goals in the last couple of away games, so he's definitely going to be up for it. So I'm going to go for a 2-1 Palace.
And I'm going to have to counter that. I think that Crystal Palace will score. Fulham don't tend to keep many clean sheets at home. I think that Mateta might get on the score sheet again, but it's not going to be easy. Certainly, looking at the form and the statistics tell you that Crystal Palace haven't conceded many goals away from home recently. But I think Fulham's form has taken an upturn this month after a bit of an indifferent January. They've won their last 3 in all competitions by the same scoreline. So I'm going to go for that streak to continue, and I'm going to go for a 4th consecutive 2-1 Fulham win. Just final thoughts before this game? Anything you're looking out for in particular?
Not especially. It's just sort of to basically get back into some kind of winning form, or at least try and get a draw out of this. Just so we get back on track, so we don't get this domino effect of losing sort of games consistently, because we've been sort of really good the last month and a bit, and we can't let that go to waste at the moment. We need to kind of secure where we are, just so we don't sort of, as I've mentioned earlier, start tumbling down the league again.
Mm-hmm. Well, there we have it. That'll do it for today's crossover episode. Many thanks to Dan for joining me from the Daily Palace podcast. Be sure to check out their podcast. Continue listening to the Daily Fulham podcast. I'll be here with you as we continue to build up to the game on the weekend. That's all for now. Catch you all next time.
Every club. Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.